Now, I want to ask you something. What is more intimate than sharing a meal with somebody? What's more intimate than sitting down and doing what is next to breathing in to humanity? A meal, sharing a meal with somebody, sharing that intimate time with them. Well, that's what Jesus was doing with his disciples when he was sharing the Passover, when he was sharing the Lord's Supper with the disciples. And it was more intimate because it was last. But in the Lord's Supper, I'm sure is something that all of us are familiar with, something that for most of us happens on a monthly basis for the majority of our lives. You know, here's what I do. Every month, things like the bread, or a lot of the little white little stuff inside that pretty passive and the wine, or popcorn grape juice. All very static images in our perception of Christianity. Things that, if not really taken time to sit back and look at, can kind of fade into the background of Christianity. But the Lord's Supper is not something that we can just simply let fade into the background. It's not a little tree in the back of a painting that has no meaning. The Lord's Supper is something that's central to our faith. It's not more important than other aspects of our Christianity, but it's just as important. But now, we talk about the Lord's Supper, we talk about the bread and the wine, we talk about our weekly communion. But what is it? What was the Lord's Supper before Jesus took it and rebirthed it through himself? I mean, what was this Passover feast to the disciples who were sitting there sharing with Jesus before it was ever anything new? And why was what Jesus did to the Passover, what he described the bread and the wine as, so shocking to the disciples? Why would it have been so not upsetting, but just a revelation, a shocking revelation that would have shaken the foundations of their faith? Let's look at that Passover. Let's look at what it was so we can better understand what it is to us. So if you go with me to Exodus 12 through 13, we'll get a better understanding of where it came from, its roots. Because this is, in essence, the roots of the Passover feast. To set up a little bit of backstory for you, what's going on here in the passage, we have Israel, enslaved in Egypt. 400 years, they are bitterly enslaved. Their life is a torment from day to day. God raises Moses up to be a deliverer. Moses goes to Pharaoh and he demands 9 times that Pharaoh release his people. 9 plagues are sent to him and 9 times he refuses. 10th time, he goes. He demands the release of the slaves. The 10th time, Pharaoh refuses, and a 10th plague is sent to him. But this plague is the most severe of them all. This plague is the angel of death passing over to claim every firstborn male child in heaven. This is a plague that God wants to save his people from because he wants to separate them from the world. He does not want to punish his people like he's going to punish the rebellious Egyptians. So he gives them a prescribed set of things to do, prescribed events. And obedience is paramount to the very letter, to the very millimeter of what God tells them to do. They have to obey. And here we see the establishment of the bread, of the wine, of the sacrificial lamb. And if we go into Exodus 12:12, we see him saying, "On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals. And I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt." Now if you're anything like me, that begins to resonate with what is going to happen in the person of Jesus. But here, it's the Passover. It's the salvation of the Israelites from enslavement. And this feast that God instills in them here he tells them to honor every year, to remember the God who brought them out of enslavement, the God who brought them out of Egypt. And the Jewish people, they do it without fail. They follow every letter of the Passover without fail every year, because that's how obedient they are to this, and that's how much it means to them. This is a time to remember their roots and who they are. And now let's break down what was considered, what the Passover was. First off, we have the matzah, or the unleavened bread. God tells the Israelites to remove all yeast from the house. There is to not be any leaven anywhere in the house, and nobody for a week is to eat any yeast. Anything made with yeast, anything that touches yeast, it is to be removed entirely. And we also have the bitter herbs, which are to represent that bitter enslavement, to remind them of where they came from, that bitter place. And there's also 4 cups that are instilled in the Passover feast. And they represent 4 promises that God made to them in Exodus 6 through 7. Now, let's go ahead and focus first on the matzah, the bread, the unleavened bread. Jesus, in Matthew 26:6, which is where we're focusing today, takes the matzah. And this unleavened bread that they bake for the Passover is what he is breaking for this. And let's go ahead and read 26 together. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave to the disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Now, to give you an idea of what matzah is simply flour and water mixed together into a dough and baked. But it has to be baked within 18 minutes of mixing, or else, even without yeast mixed into the dough, the air will add yeast to it, it'll rise. Now there's, the Jewish community views the yeast as representing the sin or the world, and how the world can come in and affect the purity of the bread, the simpleness of the bread. In literal reality, the reason why the Egyptians had to make the matzah out of just bread and water is because it baked quickly. And they were in a hurry. They were to be waiting with their cloaks tucked into their belts and with their sandals on, eating their meal, because the deliverance of the Lord could come that very moment. They were to have anticipation with their meal, not to be lax and sitting back. So whether it's just simply to make a quick bread and a quick meal, or whether it really is to represent removing the yeast of the world, the sin of the world, from permeating them, either way, it's an important symbol in the feast. And Jesus chooses this symbol to represent his body rather than the sacrificial lamb, which they would have had prepared and sacrificed earlier that day. Because, fast forwarding a little bit to what Jesus did on the cross, it makes the lamb obsolete. What's the need of a lamb sacrifice, of an animal sacrifice, when the perfect sacrifice has already come? So Jesus chooses a symbol out of the feast that we can continue to observe, that still holds significance to who he was. Because if we look at the yeast as being the sin of the world permeating the bread, rising with the bread, Christ really was the perfect unleavened bread. He was the perfect person. He was the spotless lamb. He had no sin in him. So very much like the bread, he had no yeast. And he tells them to take it and eat it. This is his body. Because he's going to be broken. Broken in the worst way possible. Broken in a way that none of us can hardly imagine. Now, let's go on to the second part of the Lord's Supper. Let's go on to the wine, grape juice. Like I said before, there's 4 cups in a Passover Seder. Now, in common Passover Seders, the 4 cups represent different stages of the feast. For example, the first cup is the wine that blesses the wine of